Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday to you. Welcome to Friday at the Fun House with Pete Pardo and Martin Popoff. Martin, good morning. Is it snowing by you?
Yes.
It's snowing by me again.
It's snowing here too. We've been getting a lot of snow here in Toronto. So yeah,
Oh,
and it's pretty cold.
I'm done. I'm done with it. It's
Yeah.
this winter we've had more snow this year than we've had in like the previous 3 winters, and I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, it's almost March. I've had enough. I'm ready for spring. Bring it
Yeah.
on. So we've got a fun topic for everybody here today. So we're not quite sure exactly what we're calling this one yet, but basically the concept is these are some bands who had these amazing, big selling, popular, influential albums. And there was all this anticipation for the follow-up. And then the follow-up came, and many of us were like, that's kind of a dud. It's kind of a turkey, kind of a stinker, right? And the sales showed it. The lack of big memorable songs from us showed it. Doesn't mean we necessarily hate these albums, but comparatively speaking, they don't quite cut the mustard of the one that came before it. So there's a lot of them out there in the history of rock and roll, right? But we've each picked 5. We're going to keep it to 5, and I'm going to have Martin kick us off with his number or his first choice of the day.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm going with and I'll explain a little more, but I'm going with the follow-up. The follow-up to this Machine Head. There's a vinyl for you. This record right here. Now, all of these, all of my choices, there's some interesting things. They can be a mix of a letdown creatively or a letdown commercially or both at once. And I've even got a couple that seem to almost be a 2-step letdown. Or I want to mention, it's kind of interesting that these bands have done this 2 or 3 times or whatever. But there's the key one. So in this case, the funny thing is, so everybody knows Machine Head. It's a great album full of all their hits. It's the one that wins all the polls as the greatest Deep Purple album all the time, right? Highway Star, Space Truckin', Smoke on the Water, Lazy, all that stuff, right? Even Never Before. I love Pictures of Home, right? But it went gold, and the follow-up went gold, believe it or not. So they both went gold. And I think the follow-up, possibly in the UK, so this is Who Do We Think We Are, went gold pretty fast. It was like one of their fastest selling. But the fact of the matter is, over time, it stayed at gold. And Machine Head, there was a certification period for Deep Purple in 1986 where it went platinum and double platinum. So the long and short of it is, after now 25 more years or 35 more years, we've got a double platinum album dropped down to a gold album. But the other thing, like I say, it's a double whammy, because Who Do We Think We Are was quite ill received at the time. It's funny. I always listen to this album and it sounds like a follow-up to Fireball. It sounds so much, the complexion and the makeup of it is so similar to Fireball that it just feels like Machine Head never happened in between. Even the production is a little bit kind of humorless and sober and mid-rangey compared, like Fireball, and not as warm and analog and bassy as Machine Head. So I don't even think the sound's as good. But so on here, it's got some of their great heavy songs, like Smooth Dancer is an amazing heavy song. Rat Bat Blues pretty heavy. Mary Long's pretty heavy. But these were not hits. Like I say, the album was badly reviewed. It has a hit on it, Woman from Tokyo, which I think is one of their worst written hits. I just never liked that song. But the other thing with this record is, so it is the last record until Reunion with Roger Glover and Ian Gillan. And also, when they were making it, they were at odds with each other. They were fighting. They had to schedule recording sessions at different times to get the thing done. They just basically weren't talking. It was recorded in Italy and France. So it's definitely a letdown. It essentially caused the breakup of the band at that point. It was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And then we get, the new version, Mark, what would that be, 3-ish at that point, with Burn. And with the 2 new guys coming in, David Coverdale, Ian Gillan, right? I mean, Glenn Hughes. So yeah, big letdown because Machine Head is so celebrated, and this is really a record that people pretty much forget about. They love In Rock. Fireball would be next from this lineup, and this would definitely be dead last of the 4 studio albums. So there you go. Who Do We Think We Are?
Yeah, it's an interesting album because there are times we've seen in rock history where the infighting kind of promotes some really artistic genius, right?
Mhm.
Not so much in that. I mean, I like that album. And I think that's an album, obviously, for many of us Purple fans, it's an album that not a lot of singles from, not a lot of songs they would always play live. So, you can listen to it in rock and it's not an album they could say, oh my God, I've heard that way too many times, right? Because all the songs kind of sound fresh because that wasn't the big album, not the album that they played all the time. But there's also a sense of kind of urgency and like angst about that album. Like you can tell that these guys weren't getting along, that there's not a lot of synergy to some of those songs. However, I think that in a way it kind of worked because it made it a pretty heavy album. It's one of the heavier albums. And I agree with 100%. Woman from Tokyo, not one of their best bigger hit songs. I just always find that kind of pedestrian. But yeah, that's a bit of a letdown, I think, artistically from the greatness that was Machine Head. And you're right, it does kind of sound like an extension of Fireball, so to speak, right? But yeah, it's a good choice. That's a good choice. And
Cool.
I think the forgotten Mark II era album for most people.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to start off here. We're right around the same time period here. So, the Alice Cooper Band released this album, Billion Dollar Babies, which was a big hit. Eventually went platinum. So many really, really memorable songs coming from this. We've got Elected, the title track, No More Mr. Nice Guy, top to bottom, just a lot of fun. And the Alice Cooper Band was one of the biggest bands, in the world at the time, right? And the still going in that upward escalation, so to speak. And then they followed that up with this thing called Muscle of Love, in this weird kind of like paper bag-ish type of thing. And what happened? All those engaging songs, those anthems that they were so known for on all those previous albums, that real kind of darker gothic, like almost like proto metal in spots sound, kind of gone on this album. And again, kind of like with the Deep Purple example, this was a band that was in complete disarray at the time. You've got, this guy who took on the mantle of Alice, Vince, who all of a sudden now is the de facto star of the band. And all of a sudden, the rest of the guys who were all equally as important at one point in time earlier on, now becoming like the backup band. And probably starting to resent all the attention that Alice is getting. And Alice is already being contacted by record labels and executives about, we need to get you away from them to go do your own thing because you're the one everybody wants to see. And this album sounds like it. Almost sounds like, and again, I like this album. I think it pales in comparison to the one before it and then the ones before that. To me, it sounds like a bunch of guys who were ready to all walk away from each other, probably recording their bits, never together. And you look at the songs and you're almost struggling to find a couple that are really, really memorable. They're not bad, Man with the Golden Gun is good. I like the title track quite a bit. Working Up a Sweat, Teenage Lament. Some of these are decent songs, but it's not this. And the sale, it only made it to number 10 on the US charts, whereas Billion Dollar Babies was the number one Billboard ranking album. And all these, songs that they would play live forever and ever and ever. And this basically was the death knell for the Alice Cooper Band. And he went on to do Welcome to My Nightmare. The rest of the guys, or most of them, with the exception of Glenn, who was having all sorts of substance abuse issues at the time, formed another band called Billion Dollar Babies, which had some potential, but they did the one album. That was it. And the rest is history. So yeah. Muscle of Love, following up this big one, big letdown.
Yeah, the funny story about that one with the album cover, two things. With that stain along the bottom of it, people thought their copy was stained when they got it, right? And also that was a cardboard box originally. And so it was expensive to make. But the other problem with the cardboard box is that the thickness of it at about like that was as thick as 6 or 7 records, and record stores did not like stocking it because it took up so much space in their bins, right? So it had that debacle going on too. But yeah, and there was a general tiredness and definitely big problems with Glenn at the time, right? and yeah, they were just working way too hard, putting out a lot of records pretty fast. And Muscle Love's a real banger on that one, I suppose, but not much else is very, very memorable.
Yeah, it you know, material wise and songwriting wise, it's just it doesn't cut the mustard. You know, when you have those great albums that came before it,
Yeah.
it's definitely a way step down.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So my next one is the follow-up to this album. I wanted to show this because so this is Back in Black. And the reason it looks like that is this is just some spare cover I had at some point, and I used it for a mouse pad for a bunch of months until it wore out, and that's mouse pad stuff there. So this is 25 times platinum, one of the biggest selling records of all time, and they followed it up with this, which went 4 times platinum, which is a great success for anybody, sort of thing. And then you know, this is a 2-step one, because then you go down to this, which I love, but this only went platinum. So they went 25 to 4 to 1. But this is the one we're talking about here. And you know, this so I first off, massive drop in sales, but that's great sales. You have to expect that. I mean, even just selling 4 million copies of a record is amazing. But I remember, you know, at the time getting this record, everybody was disappointed. Everybody had kind of had enough of AC/DC in a way, and not to say that had to happen, but it did happen, because this record sounds a little phoned in. I played this in the car driving around in the snow yesterday doing a book mailing, and man, every song, just song after song after song, is slow and mid-paced and not very heavy, and just these kind of lazy hanging chords all over the place. I mean, obviously it's an old AC/DC classic. We love it, but boy, it's really, really tired sounding in terms of like being, is it really rock and roll? No, flick of the switch. This is rock and roll as hell. I mean, this is a rockin' awesome. This is my favorite album they ever did with Bon. I mean, with Brian. But yeah, and the other thing about it is the production is a little softer than Back in Black, and a lot softer than Flick of the Switch. So it's just very puffy and bassy and analog. And the guys were really getting ticked off with Mutt Lange. They didn't work with him again after this. But Mutt, it was going into his obsessive phase when he was starting to get really obsessive about things.
Yep.
You know, it doesn't have any sort of a Mutt Lange sound to it, but he just you know, routine things and check sounds over and over and over again, until the guys were just fed up, saying, you know, you've sucked the life out of this album by just making us, this great rock and roll band, be so studied. And it really sounds like it. And you look at the songs on here, you know, all the lyrics are just kind of like silly, haha, phoned in. You don't, you know, Let's Get It Up, Inject the Venom, Snowball, Night of the Long Knives. Like, why are they saying all these things? COD, Care of the Devil, right? Which sounds like a Southern rock song. It doesn't sound like a Merciful Fate song, right? Evil Walks, same thing. You know, it's a Blackfoot song, right? And really the big hit on here is For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. And even that one tries your patience, because it's pretty slow to get going. So much on this record is these weird, just these really slow tempos throughout. So yeah, as kids, we were definitely ticked off. It felt like AC/DC had kind of sold out or gone corporate, where we were excited and cheering for them big time on Back in Black. But I love the instincts, though, that they realized it and came back with just this kick-ass album in Flick of the Switch after this. So yeah, there's my number 2, Letdown.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. When that came out, obviously, you know, Back in Black was still riding pretty high, but I think we were all kind of fatigued with it a little bit at the time. And I remember when For Those About to Rock came out, we all wanted to love it, right? Because it's like, you know what, we deserve to get Back in Black Part 2. And I remember like absolutely loving the title track and thinking the rest of it was like, this is okay,
Yeah.
but I want it to be more than okay.
Yeah.
right? And I think honestly, looking back, that that album kind of ruined Flick of the Switch for a lot of us, because I think a lot of us got disenchanted with the band because of For Those About to Rock, wanted to really love it, didn't really love it, and ignored Flick of the Switch. And I will say, all these years later, just like you listening to it yesterday, I found For Those About to Rock very hard to get through and not all that enjoyable. And on the flip side, Flick of the Switch is great and way better than we thought it was all those years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And Brian's voice is not sounding very strong. He sounds tired, right? And this is just his second album. He's got 8 more albums to go or something, right? And he's really sounded like a little croaky, and he's mixed a little back, and you're like, you know, it kind of wasn't particularly a massive problem. Well, I mean, it was somewhat of a problem going on, but you at least felt it is only a second album. It can't be that much of a problem. But there's that little thing in your head where you're like a little worried about him. You're going, oh dear, is he going to hit the note or whatever? Or is he going to ratch his throat out? Like, you're listening to the album going, can he even go on tour after singing this thing? I mean, he sounds like he's in pain, right?
Yeah.
So and on top of these songs that are just really not challenging at all, like they're just like there's no riffs on it, right? It's not full of riffs. It's just full of hanging chords, right? Sammy Hagar hanging chords, right? So yeah.
I think a lot of us always wanted to give For Those About to Rock some slack because it was the follow-up to Back in Black, and it's like, it's same producer, it came out shortly thereafter. But yeah, looking back on it, I it's like, I remember when I did the ranking the album show on AC/DC, it's like I really wanted to rank it higher, but I'm like, but it doesn't deserve to be ranked higher than it is. There's a lot of better albums than that. I mean, that's just the plain truth, right? But you were right. I mean, it sold a shitload of copies. The huge tour, they made a lot of money on For Those About to Rock. So you can't look at it as a failure. Maybe artistically, but as sales wise, and we're kind of talking about both aspects here. I mean, that was a big drop.
The funny thing is, the tour for that album was essentially the tour for Back in Black.
Yeah.
And the tour for Flick of the Switch was you're still touring Back in Black. By the time you're touring Flick of the Switch, for sure you're selling more copies of Back in Black than you're selling of Flick of the Switch. So all those tours going forward, you've got this monster record behind you. And like the fact that you've put out another record in 81 and another one in 83 is neither here nor there. You're literally still on the Back in Black tour, at that point, in terms of like, we're going out to sell records. What records are we going out to sell? We're going out to sell more records of Back in Black, and Highway to Hell for that matter, right? So yeah, it's funny from a business sense. That happens when you have such a massive album that literally you are still selling that record from 2 records ago.
Shit, Guns N' Roses is still pushing and selling that debut, right? 30 some odd years later, right?
Exactly.
It's still the debut album tour for them. So yeah, I totally get it. All right. So my next selection here. So in the early 80s, this album came out. This was pretty huge, right? I mean, this is like the big prog supergroup. Jeff Downes and John Wetton and Carl Palmer and Steve Howe. I mean, we all know bands they came from. This album comes out, sells 4 million copies, hit singles all over the place. That great artwork. Woohoo! It's like, granted, not quite prog, but a more kind of streamlined version of it. And I think the pedigree of the guys in the band, and the great songwriting. I mean, great songs on that first album, whether you call it pop or pop prog or, AOR, whatever the hell you call it. Really good. So anticipation was high when this guy came out. This is Alpha. All right. You got a very cool Roger Dean. I think we probably should have thought by the album cover that there was going to be somewhat of a letdown, because this is exciting and wow, look at that big dragon in the water, all that. And then you got, okay, it's really nice, beautiful looking, nice soft tones. You got the eagle and the water, and that's kind of nice. And that's exactly how the album is. It's kind of a nice Asia album. but it's just not a very good Asia album. And this one barely made it to platinum. I think it made it to platinum based on the strength of this, which is just like we just talked about with AC/DC, that holdover effect, right? But man, this album just doesn't have a lot of life. It's a lot of ballads. And I know Wetton at the time was really into writing this sort of thing, but Steve Howe has like got nothing to do on here. There's not a lot of really interesting drumming from Carl Palmer. This is like, almost like Downs and Wetton just wanted to do a very nice pop album, and that's what it is. For what it is, it's okay. To me, this is just a massive disappointment after that debut, and quite frankly, they never really recovered anyway. It's like this is one of those bands that greatness on the debut, and they just tried to recapture that for years and years and years, changed their sound a little bit, a lot of, moving about of members and what have you. Don't Cry was the single on this album. The Heat Goes On kind of captures a little bit of the first album, but, the rest of this is just really bland. It's a nice album. It's an easy listening album. There's some people that really love this a lot, but I don't think you'll come up to anybody who is going to say that it even holds a candle to this. Yeah. And the sales showed it. And I think just in the history of Asia, most people have kind of forgotten about this one because it's just not a really important album in their catalog. And I would argue that some of their later albums are better from an artistic standpoint than this one. This is just safe by the numbers. Let's crank out another album and be done with it. And that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's a strange concept. It's almost like on the first one, they captured this lightning in a bottle that is almost unexpected, because having these old prog guys do that well, that late, and this pretty kind of raw and raspy voice in John Wetton, like it's a funny voice. It was a weird recording. Steve Howe is a bit of an obscure, arcane guitarist. The drums were boomy. There's a lot of things just about the sound that seemed like it was a surprise that it was a hit. But it was a hit, and it almost feels like there's an element of maybe we were all right that this is kind of like a one record thing. This is like, there's some magic here. It's interesting. It's weird, but I don't need it twice kind of thing. And you almost feel a little bit of that with Asia, right?
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I don't think that the first album is really what we expected from that group. Mm-hmm. It turned out in their favor, right? It really worked, but it's not at all what I thought they were going to pump out when I first heard the news that these guys were getting together. I was like, oh, that's going to be, like, you know what you thought it was going to be, and it wasn't. Yeah. But what it was really good. And then that magic, like a flash in the pan, kind of the second album came. It's like, well, what happened here? Yeah. That's not as fun as that first album was at all. Yeah. Some nice stuff on it. It's kind of pleasing, some of the tunes, but man, the magic was just not there for me. Yeah. And the general public kind of felt the same, which is why it sort of got ignored to, a million copies. Hey, that's nothing to sneeze at, but based on the massive first album, definitely a letdown.
Yeah. All right. Okay. My number 3 choice, going in reverse order here, is this one here, Theater of Pain from Motley Crue, as a follow-up to Shout at the Devil, Motley Crue. And the story here is that this was a super exciting, dangerous album full of iconic videos and great hits like Look That Kill and hang on, where do we go? Helter Skelter was not a big deal on it, right? Let me just grab my copy here. So yeah, Shout at the Devil was an awesome, massive metal sort of hit. Looks That Kill, Bastard was somewhat of a, that got played a fair bit. It's got the red Helter Skelter on here. Red Hot, Too Young to Fall in Love was an amazing song. Great video also. Knock 'em Dead Kid was somewhat famous. 10 Seconds to Love was somewhat famous. Not so much God Bless the Children of the Beast, not so much Danger, but great production, uncharacteristic Tom Werman production on this. I mean, but it was boomy, it was dangerous, it was wild, it was a huge follow-up. It was very successful. This record went 4 times platinum, but the thing is, this is not a commercial letdown, unfortunately, showing that people have terrible taste, but everybody complained about it big time. And the band is not even that much of a fan of it. The band is not that much of a fan of this or Girls, Girls, Girls. But this went 4 times platinum, and Girls, Girls, Girls also went 4 times platinum. But in terms of creative success of this is not very much of a successful record at all. I mean, the commercial success comes from Home Sweet Home, which is a pretty rote, annoying power ballad, and then a cover of Smoking in the Boys Room, which does nothing over the original, and it's a cover, haha, you know. And creatively speaking, you know, I know a guy who prides himself on creativity, like a Nikki Sixx, was probably annoyed, really, that here we are doing covers and we're having a hit with a cover. And then everything else on here is just an unknown Motley Crue song. No one remembers any of these songs. I always loved City Boy Blues, the opening track on it. It's my favorite song on the whole album. But big letdown. And then the final thing that annoyed everybody was we changed up the look for pure glam, for a pure hair metal look. Everybody talks about this. Everybody remembers this, right? It's the thing that annoyed everybody about this record. The drugs and the drinking problem is getting worse. They're just really tired at this point. And yeah, you know, basically no one really remembers this album as a good creative album. And I just wanted to mention that this happened again with Motley Crue in a bigger way, in a more commercial way, when you follow up Dr. Feelgood with this one. Dr. Feelgood was a massive return to form. It was the Go to Vancouver and Try Harder album, as I call them. I did an episode on of History in 5 Songs called that, Go to Vancouver and Try Harder. But then, of course, obviously they lost Vince Neil too, which was a big deal. But they went from a drop of something like 6 times platinum from Dr. Feelgood down to gold. So when they lose Vince, to make this record and replace him with John Corabi, creatively this is a good record. A lot of Crue fans think this is one of the best records they ever made, and I agree with that. Very cool record creatively, but 6 times platinum down to gold. So they did it kind of twice. And there you go, Motley Crue.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I give a lot of shit to Motley Crue on this,
I know.
and it's almost to the point of being legendary, right? But I will tell everybody, in case anybody's curious, I was a pretty big fan. Too Fast for Love and Shout at the Devil. I dug those albums quite a bit when I was younger, and for me, when that Theater of Pain album came out, I was like, I'm done with this band.
Yeah,
and then the one after that. And I was like, yeah, I have no use for these guys ever again. And, you know, and I like the Corabi album. That's actually probably the best thing that they have ever done after Shout at the Devil. But yeah, I mean, they were very cool. They were cool to look at. They were cool to listen to. There was a vibe about them on those first 2 albums that was like, it was kind of fresh and exciting at the time, right? And, you know, if you saw them live, I remember on that Shout at the Devil tour, they were amazing. And then all of a sudden, it's like they basically put out these albums that they wanted to be loved by the chicks, right? I mean, that was part of it too. And all of a sudden, all the balls that band had and all the grit was just gone. And I saw from that Theater of Pain album, and then the one after that, Girls, 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 I'm like, these guys are never going to be the same again. Ever going to be the same again.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Right on.
All right, so my next choice here. So I'm going to kind of stick on the prog side of things here. So the band Yes broke up late 70s, regrouped again, put out this killer album called Drama with 2 new guys in the band, replacing 2 key members. I think most Yes fans really, really love that album, especially looking back on it. But it wasn't to last. They were to break up again and get together again under a different configuration and put out this album called 90125. So here you got John Anderson back in the band. You've got Trevor Rabin, Tony Kaye, their original keyboard player, is back. Originally wasn't going to be called Yes, but the record company was like, well, we have to call it Yes, right? You've got Chris Squire, of course. You've got Alan White. So that almost called the Yes West, right? So you got the kind of this new California style version of Yes. And you know what? This totally captured the ears of the music public at the time. Very modern sounding album. This album does not sound like Close to the Edge or Tales from Topographic Oceans or Fragile or any of that stuff. Doesn't sound like Drama. Doesn't sound like Tormato. This is a poppy arena rock, Yes, and hit singles. Yes, hit singles. Owner of a Lonely Heart, of course, right? You got Changes, Leave It, all these, there's all these songs that really kind of energize the sound of the band. Maybe alienated some of the old fans, but you know what? It went on to sell 3 million copies. Owner of a Lonely Heart, huge hit. The tour was enormous, right? So big expectations. They kept the lineup together, but of course they took a while to come out with the follow-up. So a few years later, out comes Big Generator. Awful album cover notwithstanding. I mean, look at this. I mean, this kind of putrid yellow and pink. And the album basically sounds like 90125 Light. The formula is basically the same. No massive single, Love Will Find a Way was the single, which did okay, but nothing on the level of Owner of a Lonely Heart. Rhythm of Love, they pushed a lot. Kind of a bland song. You got a couple hard rockers on here. Nothing overly proggy in the grand scheme of Yes, and I don't think artistically speaking anything quite as engaging as what you heard on 90125. And this one made it to number 15. I think years later it finally hit platinum, but a massive commercial disappointment for the band. And before you know it, all of a sudden you've got the band splitting up again. You've got Anderson, Bruford, Waker, and Howe. You've got then, they do the union thing and they bring everybody together. That doesn't last. Then they get back together with this lineup. They do Talk, and then that splits up. And it's just like, after this, as successful as this was, it's almost like they were never going to kind of achieve that again. And as history shows, they never did. And the band has struggled with lineup changes and weird fluctuations in sound and quality of albums and songs and things like that. And never the same. So yeah, massive letdown after, the greatness that is this album. And this is still a great Yes album, even though it is very different when you look at their catalog as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was always the behind the scenes. Everybody kind of knew, if you were a follower of the band, that it was the overworked, difficult album, hard to put together. Why are we making an album? Is this ever going to come out? Blah, blah, blah kind of thing. It's a little bit like that Pyromania through Hysteria and Adrenalize thing, right? Where you started hearing that these things were taking forever, what's going on. And starting with the album cover, it's already a big brick wall is up, right? In terms of,
you would think after all those years, they can come up with something a little more, a little better than this.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Terrible.
All right. So my next one, I'm looking around here why I didn't have the album cover out to make the part 2, but let's just do it as the part 1 here. And I'll just mention the part 2. It is the jump from this album, Eliminator, through to this album, Afterburner. And I almost thought at the last minute I was going to instead talk about Recycler, because Recycler, the funny thing there is that there's a 5-year gap from Afterburner to Recycler, and they kind of come out and do the same thing again. And it's another huge drop in sales. But this makes a lot of sense as well, because this went diamond in the States. So 10 million copies. No one saw that coming for ZZ Top. They were never that kind of successful, right? Obviously, big change in sound. Billy talks about how he'd go out to clubs and see people dancing and realize there's a certain number of beats per second that makes a dance tune. And so he came up with this idea of making dancey hard rock kind of thing. And that's part of why it sounds the way it does. But just wanting to be modern, they had that break where Billy went to Paris and all this, and he heard more avant-garde music, and they just wanted to modernize things. Other than that, the funny thing about this record is as kids, we essentially heard it as much heavier than all the rest of ZZ Top, because it is essentially guitar with distortion pedal on it, and pretty up-tempo songs and pretty gnarly riffs and solos and stuff all the way through, compared to, all sorts of southerny rock things that you got on old ZZ Top albums, right? So it's kind of heavy in a way, right? But So this thing goes diamond, and then we move on to this record here, which went 5 times platinum. So again, it's an amazing success as sales wise, but it's half. But the main thing about this is you really kind of lost confidence in ZZ Top as a band who was fearlessly creative or moving forward or giving you really cool stuff, because it's so much a weak tea version of Eliminator. It's really like, we're going to do the exact same thing again. And the songs kind of aren't as strong, although I think Sleeping Bag's a pretty creative song, but Stages, no. Rough Boy is kind of like a rote power ballad. So, I remember thinking at the time, ZZ Top's kind of sold out or jumped the shark or whatever you want to call it on this record. No one really gave this a lot of credit for being, a good record, a creative record. Planet of Women. So you're getting these, Velcro Fly, Dipping Low in the Lap of Luxury is just so dull. It's like Concrete and Steel on Recycler. Delirious is all right, because there you get a Frank Beard vocal on that. That's an amazing vocal. But no, this record is just like a weak version of the excitement that you felt in Eliminator when it was all sort of fresh. And then, like I say, they do it again, and people were very surprised. Recycler is kind of, to do that from 83 and to do it again all the way up to 1990 with a similar album cover and everything, that was kind of spelt the end for them. And I think that went down to, it was either platinum or double platinum, only platinum. Yeah. And then after that, they're off Warner Brothers and moving on to an Antenna, which actually does okay. And creatively, they're pretty cool again. That one goes platinum as well. So they have some success moving into the new decade, but it's just drop across these 3 albums, where second one's part 2, third one's part 3. There you go. ZZ Top.
Yeah, and I think, did we really want part 2 and part 3 of Eliminator, right? I mean, there was a cool factor of that album, and that's the key word, cool, which that album is not. It's not a very cool album, right? It's not a very fun album, other than a couple tracks. Yep. All right. So, band called the Doobie Brothers, right? Came out with this album called Minute by Minute, which was a huge hit for the band. 3 million, lots of hit singles, top 10 singles, right? What a Fool Believes, title track. Kind of this, the Doobie Brothers, when Michael McDonald joined the band, they became this kind of like this rock and soul band, so to speak. They became more of a soft rock band, but it really clicked with a lot of people. You got Skunk Baxter from Steely Dan's in the band, and so there's that kind of little jazz rock thing going on there as well. And this was a monster album that clicked with a lot of people. They won Grammys, all that sort of thing. And then they follow that up a couple years later with One Step Closer, which didn't quite cut the mustard. And I guess this is a time period in the history, especially here in North America, where these albums are driven by hit singles, because the radio stations want the singles, the labels want the big singles. And while this had a handful of tracks that kind of fit the mold there, all of a sudden you get to this album and it's like, well, there's nothing quite as good as What a Fool Believes on here. We're gonna push out a single called Real Love, which, man, took like the mellowest stuff from here and dialed it down even another notch. And that's the big problem with this album. It's not a very lively album. It's a lot of ballads. It's a lot of like really easy listening R&B and soul. And all of a sudden that kind of like early attitude and vibe of the Doobie Brothers is even further removed, right? Even from this one, because there was a little bit left in this album. This album, it's like all that energy just like sucked dry, and it's not a fun album to listen to. It's not a memorable album to listen to. And you got the Ted Templeman production, which is okay, but it's very sterile. And this one barely made it to gold. And there's a reason for that. And again, as we've seen in a lot of these instances and others, all of a sudden you have this really big band who tries to follow up a huge album. It tanks. And then before you know it, you blink and the band is done, right? members leave. This was the last Michael McDonald album to be featured. Michael McDonald. They went on hiatus for a bit, and yeah, it just this is like one of those long forgotten Doobie Brothers albums in the history of their discography, and there's a reason for it. It's not very good.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I got to check this stuff out a little more because I don't know my Doobie Brothers very well. I mean, I think I own every Doobie Brothers album, and I try them every once in a while. And when the singles come on the radio, I'm loving all the singles, and even the deep tracks. When I put them on, I'm into it. But I've never really absorbed it. I mean, just the style of music they play. You know, when you say rock and soul, that's exactly kind of it. And I'm just not a big fan of that. Right. So it's one of those retirement bands that I have to spend more time learning. But that's interesting to know that there's this drop period there. So you're saying triple platinum to gold, eh?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And you know, the only single they released did not do very well. I mean, Real Love. I remember hearing a little bit on the radio, but it's really pedestrian, really laid back. And, you know, it's funny. I all these years later, I've been listening to these guys for decades. And, you know, I have, when it comes to their discography now, even this one, their big, massive seller, I don't really listen to much anymore. I have soured on the Michael McDonald period. I would, you know, give me the Vices album and the Captain and Me and all those early ones before McDonald joined. Those are great rockin' albums, just with a lot of piss and vinegar and great songwriting and a lot of variety. And I love those albums to death. That's kind of like, you know, the Doobies back when they're that biker rock mentality they had. And they just became like kind of like a white soul band here at this point in their career. And it's like, it's not terrible by any means. It's just, it's not really the Doobies that I kind of gravitate towards anymore. I can appreciate the hits and the albums. They're fine to listen to, but man, I want the Doobies with a bit of balls, you know, and I miss that on these albums.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So my number one choice is this one. Rolling Stones, Undercover. So the story here is that, and Stones have had this happen a couple of times. They're a massive band who have had, you know, ups and downs in the sales along the way. But this one is really pronounced because it is a big drop in sales, and it's also a big drop in how much people are loving the Stones, right? Because Tattoo You comes out. I remember I was first year university when that came out. Everybody was playing that album, loving Start Me Up and Waiting on a Friend and Little TNA and all these great songs on this record. You know, amazingly, it's a little bit of a physical graffiti in that it's as they say, a dog's breakfast in the UK, right? It's a bunch of stuff kind of just put together all over the place. Things, you know, grasping for ideas and old recordings and making this record that sounds fantastic. Everybody loved it. And that in itself was a return to form because the Stones did this before with the great success and the love that they were getting for Some Girls, and the drop down to Emotional Rescue, which people thought was a little bit of a slack, lazy version of Some Girls, a little bit phoned in. It got some bad reviews, right? But here they are having this ascendance after a very small drop, because Some Girls, I think, was 6 times platinum. So, you know, and that followed on 2 platinum albums, Black and Blue and It's Only Rock and Roll. And before that, they kind of had this happen again with Goat's Head Soup being pretty successful down to It's Only Rock and Roll. But so at this point, they're riding a about a 4-year wave of being massive again. You know, a one of these late career or mid-career resurgences, and they had this album that everybody loved, and then this thing comes out, and it's one of these difficult albums where you've got Mick loving the downtown New York atmosphere and the urban sounds and wanting to put in kind of like you know, nascent hip-hoppy beats, but a lot of noise. There's a lot of guest stars doing percussion and stuff on this, and Keith wanting to do more of the regular old school style Stones, and they're totally fighting about this. And what you end up is with an album of kind of just braying, noisy screechiness. Undercover the Night exemplifies that, the you know, the erstwhile title track. Really, as a hit on here, there's She Was Hot. And it was somewhat of a hit, and it's an okay song, but it's not that much different than your "She's So Cold" for that matter, right? Or whatever, right? What would this compare to on Some Girls? Anyways, it's just a standard, Rolling Stones kind of tune. The record gets better towards right near the end with Too Tough all the way down and It Must Be Hell. I think those are three of the better songs on it, but Too Much Blood, very annoying, pretty beat up. Tie You Up, The Pain of Love. None of these songs are particularly celebrated. And so they go from 4 times platinum on Tattoo You down to platinum on this. And then, they follow it up with this, and they're not very celebrated again. It's almost like, hey, everybody, it's time to hate the Stones again, right? So they're getting a lot of abuse for this album. They're getting abuse for Undercover, and right in the middle, they had between Tattoo You and, here's another reason why there was a lot of love for the Stones. There was this big, massive tour with this really pastel kind of look that was a very celebrated tour, came out with this awful, awful live album, which still sold well, which shows you that there's like love in the tank for the Stones. But this had covers and weird, obscure songs on it. It's just not very good, with a terrible album cover to boot, right? But yeah, there you go. I mean, it's literally the third time in not very long that they had this happen. And it kind of was the end for the Stones. They never recovered that critical reputation. I personally like most of those later records, and they had a slight blip in reacceptance with Steel Wheels and the massive tour that was the Steel Wheels tour. But they never, ask any medium size or large size Stones fan, and they, one of the things they will say is their last great album was Tattoo You.
Yeah. I'd say the Stones probably used up all their 9 lives and somehow got a few more, right? And they're still using
it. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Undercover is kind of a messy album. I mean, I dig the title track a lot, but yeah, most of a good chunk of that album is just not very memorable. It's like, you look at the title of the song, and you're like, yeah, I don't even know how that goes.
Yeah. Exactly.
As much as I've listened to it, right?
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of massive bands, so my final pick for today. So many people call this the cocaine album, right? So this band called Fleetwood Mac, right? They kind of retool their lineup in the mid 70s. They get this couple from the West Coast, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. They release the self-titled Fleetwood Mac album with a kind of a new sound, right? And boom, does big business. They follow that up with Rumors, one of the biggest selling rock albums of all time, an absolute classic. What are we talking about sales here? 20 million and still going strong, right? It's a lot of records, right? So biggest band on the planet, arguably, right? They're all feeling the success. They're all enjoying life to the extreme, right? We know what the late 70s, what that entailed, right? The White Stuff, which is almost what your Back in Black album looked like if we were to go back in time 40 years, right? It's like, Martin, what were you using that album for, right? But they followed up. They decided to put out a double album, right? They take forever to put this album out. This comes out in 79, right? So Tusk comes out. And while this album sounds like a band loving being together and, writing together, and all the songs just make perfect sense, no matter who's singing or whatever, then you got this album, which sounds like a bunch of people who recorded their own songs in whatever studio they were in, threw it all together and said, all right, let's release an album. And this, at the time, was like, I think, the most expensive album ever to record. They spent over $1 million to put this thing together. And in the end, I think it only sold 2, right? And so from 20 to 2, my issue with this album is that, you've got Lindsey, who I think was in a weird place at the time as far as like the kind of music he was into and listening to. So there's a whole bunch of these short 1.5 to 3 minute long kind of power pop and post-punk songs from Lindsey Buckingham, which quite frankly, I don't really like much. I dig the Christine McVie stuff on here. Over and Over is great. Think About Me, Brown Eyes, Never Make Me Cry. Those are really good songs, classic Christine McVie. You got Sarah and Sisters of the Moon, which are terrific Stevie songs. Angel is pretty good, but as a double album, I mean, we've talked a lot about those double albums in rock history that probably were an LP too long, right? That if you had kind of condense it all to a single album, you probably have a much better album. This is, to me, the poster child for that. I just have never found this to be a very engaging album. There's way too many songs and just some stuff that's just like, it's just not overly memorable. And that magic, that aura that this had, and even the album before it, I just don't get with this album. And it just, to me, sounds like I call it the Coke album for a reason, because we all know the stories. That everybody in the band was totally whacked out during this time period, and it just kind of sounds like it. And the record buyers, they kind of stayed away from this. I know a lot of people, all these years later, a lot of people, I think, feel a little more fondly about this album than they did back then, and maybe myself to a certain extent, but there's no bigger drop off in quality or sales than right here. So this is all the way up here. This was, it's down on the floor. So, that's
yeah.
What can I say?
It's funny though. I mean, when you rattled off those songs, it's almost like by virtue of it being a double album, there probably is a 3/5 of a Fleetwood Mac album or a 3/5 of a Rumors embedded in there.
Well, there totally is. Yeah, absolutely.
In those short melodic hits, right? There's a few of those songs on there, right? But yeah, you're right. It's so disjointed, and that album cover just turns you right off immediately, right? It's like they're just daring you to like this crazy, obscure, ridiculous thing.
If you don't like it, we're going to sick our dog on you, right? Yeah, and it's like, but what does the title have to do with anything, right? With the album cover, it's just
And I know it was embossed too, right? The original vinyl, it was bumpy, right? Which is kind of cool. So yeah, it's neat. I like the fearlessness of them doing something like that. That was kind of good to see. They definitely did not make a safe record, and that's kind of commendable in this, because a lot of these ones we've talked about are the jump the shark, turn in the safe record over again, right?
Almost every one.
Yeah.
So this is the one example where they just totally went out there in a different direction.
Yeah.
You have to give them. Was it the best business decision at the time? Probably not, because they spent a shitload on recording it. It didn't make much money, and and we know everything that happened afterwards.
Yeah. Great choice. Cool.
So this was a really fun conversation, because I like kind of going a little bit deeper in things, and looking back at some of these type of scenarios in rock history, and then there's others. I mean, the bigger list we were looking at had some other interesting choices too. So maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point of this, but we'll see.
It's possible, yeah.
We'll see. We'll see how much everybody digs this. Cool. So there you have it, everybody. Martin, you want to give any plugs to some new stuff coming in?
Not particularly, just martinpopoff.com for any of the books kicking around. The Sweet book is coming in soon, so that's kind of cool.
Cool. So something I never asked you. So like over the last month or two, or in early 2021 so far, what have been your biggest sellers as far as the titles? Like, what's really moving for you?
Well, The Angel did quite well. These coffee table books I'm doing through Weimer have done pretty well. Just 2020 in general was almost a double size year of any previous year. So just across the board, it was a lot of book sales, because, I think people really appreciate having these extra entertainment choices when they're at home. I know people have said that about your videos, right? You're keeping them alive, and you're keeping their spirits up through the years, with these, or through the months, with these shows, right? And I think that goes for the likes of my books or Netflix, of course, for that matter, right?
Yeah.
It's the reason Amazon's doing well, right? A mail order of stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's a mail order business right now for a little while.
This is amazing, like all the fun stuff out there to do when you realize you just can't go out of your house anymore, right? It's like, there's plenty to keep yourself occupied. It's like people, I'm so bored. I'm like, how can you be bored? It's like, I'm busier. I got more stuff occupying my time now than I ever did. It's like crazy. And I don't go anywhere. So
exactly. Yeah.
All right, everybody, there you have it. So stay tuned. Martin and I are working on a couple other show ideas, and I'll say it right here. We don't have the exact topic yet, but Martin and I will be doing a live show coming up either next week or the week after. So we're just trying to put the finishing touches on exactly what we're going to be doing as a topic, but we will be doing an evening show at night where it's going to be all live. So stay tuned for that. That's a long time coming, actually. So Martin and I were talking like last year about, maybe one of these days when the world is a different place, we might love to do some kind of in-person thing somewhere where in some nice city somewhere where we can have a bunch of people show up and make it a lot of fun. But obviously that's not happening right now. So in the interim, we'll do it on Zoom and on YouTube. So what are you going to do? The next best thing, right? So there you have it, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody. See you later.